So welcome back everyone. So now that we understand the concept of magnetic moment, bulk magnetization, rotation of M0 about B1 magnetic field, free precession and all, uh, so which actually generates NMR signal which is then Fourier transformed to obtain the information about offset and the relaxation behavior of individual signals. So let us now try to understand a few important concepts. So first concept is of we have briefly discussed this before. So first concept is of chemical shift. Okay, so we learned that when we were looking at the example of ethanol, that the three different types of protons, CH3, the methyl protons, the methylene, and the hydroxyl protons have their own Larmor precession. That is, their omega CH3 is different from omega CH2, is different from omega OH, right? And that results in a corresponding offset. So offset of CH3 is different from offset of CH2, and which is different from offset of OH, right? So so this difference in offset appears because of their local chemical differences in the local chemical environment. So what do I mean when I say local chemical environment? So if you look at the structure here, there is a difference of electronegativity between different atoms. So for example, oxygen is the most electronegative element among these. So because of this arrangement of atoms, the electronic cloud gets pulled around different atoms. The electronic cloud which is present around different atoms, that gets pulled towards oxygen to different extent. For example, if I say the hydroxyl proton is nearest to this atom, so hydroxyl proton, if you are observing hydroxyl proton, so electronic cloud of hydroxyl proton gets pulled most because of simple distance relation. So oxygen is closest to this hydroxyl proton, so it works. So the electronegativity of oxygen works best for hydroxyl proton, and that's why this particular hydrogen is most devoid of electronic cloud or electronic density. This is followed by so if I use the less than sign for electronic density, so this is followed by the CH2 proton. So CH2 proton is the next one, next closest hydrogen atom. So this will be devoid of electron density, but not as much as hydroxyl proton would. Then this will be followed by CH3. Okay, so now why we are discussing electron density when this technique is actually the nuclear technique, right? We have been discussing that it's a nuclear technique. It's related to nuclear magnetic moments and how they are precessing around the magnetic field, right? So electrons have their own magnetic field which tend to oppose the applied magnetic field direction. So what I mean is if you have B0 in this direction, which is the applied magnetic field, and you have mu h, that is the magnetic moment of individual proton, and if it is surrounded by electron, so electron would have its own magnetic field which will try to oppose the externally applied field. Okay, so what I mean is that if Larmor precession of protons in general is given by negative gamma B naught, then Larmor precession of OH will be reduced because they will not experience the actual B0, but they will experience the reduced B0. So that reduced B0 is then given by negative gamma 1 minus sigma OH into B0. So that sigma is called as shielding constant. How much of the electron density is shielding that particular proton from B0? Okay, so this is called as shielding constant, and that totally depends on the structure of the molecule. So that's why this technique can actually help you determine the structure, right? So similarly, now if we say omega CH2 then omega CH2 will be having its own shielding constant, and similarly omega CH3 minus gamma 1 minus sigma CH3. So now you see that even though the applied magnetic field is constant for all the protons and the gyromagnetic ratio is constant for all the protons, it is the shielding constant, differences in the shielding constant, which actually translates into the Larmor precession of different protons and then offset of different protons, which is measured by NMR, right? So the shielding constant is actually a tensor quantity. The different components of this tensor quantity is are sigma xx, sigma xy, sigma xz. Similarly, sigma yx, sigma yy, sigma yz, sigma zx, zy, zz. So now when I'm writing it in this form, it is clear that chemical shift, or let's not call it as chemical shift yet, so let's call it as shielding constant is a directional property, right? How the molecule is oriented with respect to the magnetic field, it would change these different parameters. So sigma xx is the one which is measured along x direction, then this is measured along xy and xz. So as it is clear that it is very difficult to measure these different shielding constants, so to simplify the measurements, what is done is that this tensor is diagonalized in a principal component coordinate system. So in that coordinate system, what is done is, so you only have sigma xx, sigma yy, and sigma zz, which are the shielding constants along the axis, and rest of the components turn out to be so you make them 0. So by carrying out diagonalization process, you make the rest of the components 0, and so you only measure the terms which are along the diagonal, which are sigma xx, sigma yy, and sigma zz, right? Okay, so again for isotropic solution, so for solution state NMR, the molecules are tumbling isotropically. So in solution state, NMR, molecules are tumbling. There is isotropic tumbling of molecules due to thermal motions, right, of molecules. So what do I mean? That the molecules are rotating, translating, colliding with each other, and that actually changes the orientation of molecule with respect to the field, which averages out the shielding constants along x-axis, along y-axis, and along z-axis. So what happens? You end up measuring sigma isotropic, which is nothing but the average of the three components. So essentially we measure only the average shielding constant for all protons, right, or for all individual nuclei. So in case of solid state NMR though, there is no isotropic tumbling of molecules, because the molecule rotations are frozen because of the state of the matter. So in that case, you can measure sigma xx, sigma yy, sigma zz independently. There are techniques to measure in solid state NMR. So you can get individual shielding constants, and this is called as chemical shift anisotropy. Okay. So in case of solution state NMR, you can't measure the anisotropy because there is isotropic tumbling of molecules, whereas in case of solid state NMR, you can measure chemical shift anisotropy. Also in case of solution state, if you freeze the motion, so let's say you supply certain kind of viscous solution, so you can measure something called as residual chemical shift anisotropy. So that is possible. It is called as RCSA, residual chemical shift anisotropy. That is possible to measure, but complete anisotropy can be measured only in solid state NMR, not in solution state NMR. Okay, so now because of this difference in offset values of various protons measured, which appears due to differences in the chemical nature, this process or this these differences are called as chemical shift. So one of the proton is chemically shifted by other proton because of this change in the sigma value, right? So this process, that's why it is called as chemical shift, because the origin of this difference is because of the local chemical environment, right? So chemical shift. Okay. So now, although this offset is magnetic field dependent, right? So I mean, if you see offset, so the offset is B0 minus BRF, right? So it has a applied magnetic field dependence. It also has this RF dependence. So in practice, this magnetic field dependence is actually removed by comparing the offset values with the offset of a reference compound. So what we do is, so we compare offset, let's say offset of OH, we compare it with offset of a external reference compound, which is externally added to your sample, and then you compare the two offsets, and hence the B0 is the dependence on B0 is removed. So for example, what we do is we add in most of the samples, you will see we add tetramethylsilane, or we also add another compound called DSS. This is water soluble, and this is mostly organic solvent soluble. Okay. So these compounds are added because their protons have maximum electron density around as compared to regular compounds. Okay, so that means if the electron density is maximum, then there would be a maximum shielding for these compounds from external magnetic field. That means they will appear far off from the compounds of interest or from molecules of interest. So what I mean is then how do you compare the two offsets is, so you basically convert omega factor into something called as delta factor. So this is measured in hertz and this is measured in ppm. How do you do that? So for example, delta of OH is calculated. So again, we are discussing CH3 CH2 OH example. So omega, capital omega OH minus offset of TMS or DSS, any of the compounds, divided by omega naught, which is the applied magnetic field frequency, that's the Larmor precession of protons, into 10 to the power 6. And now this becomes unitless, and then because you are multiplying with 10 to the power 6, so you say parts per million. Okay, so now let us see how do we, let us take an example and see how to calculate this. Okay, so let's say that my omega OH, or let's say offset, actually not this omega. So offset of OH is appearing at 600 Hertz. Offset of CH2 is coming at, let's go the other way around, CH3 at 600, OH at CH2 at 1100 Hertz, and offset of OH at 2100 Hertz. I'm just choosing these numbers randomly, and then offset of TMS is, let's say, at 100 Hertz. Okay, so that means if I'm plotting all these peaks as a function of offset, I will have TMS here at 100, omega in Hertz. Then I will have CH3 proton. So I'm ignoring the peak line widths, I'm just drawing it as a delta function. So this is at 600 Hertz. Then I have, let's say, also this is not to scale, CH2. So this will be 1100 Hertz. Then I have OH, which is 2100 Hertz. Okay. So now this means that my carrier frequency, that is omega RF, is kept somewhere here, right? So that's why there is a 100 Hertz difference from the RF. So right. So if RF is kept here, then this will become 0, right? And accordingly, all of these will be shifted, let's say. Okay, let's discuss one case by one. We'll discuss this case again. Okay. So now if you calculate delta values for all of these, so let's calculate delta TMS. Delta TMS now using that formula will be delta will be omega TMS minus omega TMS divided by omega naught into 10 to the power 6. Now this is in this case this is 100 minus 100, and let's say the applied field is at 500 megahertz, so I'm going to write 500 10 to the power 6 because this is in hertz into 10 to the power 6, so this becomes 0 ppm. Okay, so we are choosing TMS as a reference compound, so that's why the reference compound delta value or chemical shift of TMS will come out to be 0 ppm. Now let's calculate for OH. This will be omega OH minus omega TMS divided by omega naught into 10 to the power 6, and this becomes 2100 minus 100 divided by 500 into 10 to the power 6 into 10 to the power 6. This becomes 2000 divided by 500, that is 4 ppm. Similarly, delta CH2 will come out to be 2 ppm. You can calculate this now. And delta CH3 will come out to be this will be 1 ppm. Now let us calculate, now let us change the carrier frequency. So if we change the carrier frequency to TMS, let us now keep our carrier at omega RF at TMS. So that means the offsets will change. So offset, the new offsets will become 0, 500, because now the offset will be with respect to this 1000, and this will become 2000. And now if you calculate the delta values, what will happen to delta OH? Let's say the delta OH will be 500 minus 0, sorry, this will be 2000 minus 0 divided by 500 into 10 to the power 6, 10 to the power 6. So this will still be 4 ppm. So that means no matter where you're going to keep your carrier frequency, your delta value is still going to be same, right? So so you don't worry about where you're keeping your RF value. You only want to minimize the offset values as we discussed earlier, but you can keep it anywhere. Your delta values will still remain constant because you're comparing your delta with respect to TMS, okay, or with respect to an external reference. You can actually choose anything to be your standard. You can also choose water as a reference. You can choose any other solvent as your reference, solvent peaks as your reference, but you have to define whenever you're reporting your chemical shift values, that is the values in ppm, you have to define that I'm comparing my values with respect to so and so peak. Okay, so in general, peaks are always compared with respect to TMS or DSS. You can always compare with respect to water, but you need to mention that. Okay, so that is all about chemical shift. Another important feature which is to be discussed is called as signal averaging. Okay, so what is signal averaging? To understand signal averaging, we need to understand that what is noise. And so we already know that NMR signal is very weak because of low population difference or low population excess in the ground state. So if you remember that at 298 Kelvin for 500 megahertz, we calculated that the difference, the population of N alpha is 50.003% and population of beta was given by 49.997%, right? So the population excess in ground state is very, very small, and this leads to a very weak NMR signal. Okay, so now any emerging signal from probe coil also contains some noise. So what I mean is, if the signal looks like this, if this is your signal, there is also something called as electronic noise, which is random and which is also coming from the probe coil. Okay, now overall the signal looks something like this because it also contains noise. So it doesn't look just like this. So you will have this plus this. This is coming from the proton relaxation. This is coming from random noise, which I will tell what is the source of that. So the signal looks something like this. Okay, so now if this signal and this noise, if the signal to noise ratio is not high enough, then your signal will merge into noise. So you won't be able to detect if let's say if the signal is only this much. So you won't be able to detect whether it is noise or signal because signal to noise ratio is very small here, right? So your job is to amplify the signal to noise ratio. How do you do that? So there are so let us first understand what is noise and what are the sources of noise. So if you have ever tuned a radio between different channels, you hear a sound which is like his sound, right? So between, let's say if you're trying to tune from 91 to 95 megahertz, then in between where there is no frequency, you say that okay, there is no signal coming, and that's why you're hearing only the hiss sound, right? That hiss sound is nothing but the noise. So mathematically you can write it as signal at any given point is equal to overall signal is equal to SNMR, which is the signal part, plus S noise, which is the noise part. Okay, so now what is the source of that noise? So the source of that, there are two major sources. One is the thermal motion of ions, different ions which are moving around, that will create this kind of noise. And second is thermal motion of electrons in probe coil, in the receiver coil where the signal is received. The electrons are always moving because of thermal motions, and that motion is random, and that random motion gives out to be this random noise, right? So these are the two sources. So now that we know the sources, what can we do to avoid noise or to minimize the noise? Okay, so let's see. So there are three strategies which can be implemented to overcome noise. So first is by probe design. We will see that later when we'll discuss the instrumentation part. So probe design is one factor which we will see later. The second part is called as post-processing, which we'll also see later. This will come when we'll discuss how to process NMR spectrum, and there we can actually discard a lot of noise, which is unwanted noise. We'll see how to do that. So third is called as signal averaging, which we can discuss now. So what is signal averaging? So what you basically do is you exploit the property that NMR signal is reproducible, whereas noise is random. So when I say reproducible, it means that when you record the same experiment again and again, so let's say if I'm recording signal once, I will get something like this. If I'm again recording the same signal, I will get peak at exact position with the identical height. And if I'm doing this over and over again, and if I add all of this, I should expect to see 3 times the signal, right? So mathematically what we can say is, if I'm writing it as SNMR, let's say if I do once, then I again record the signal in second experiment. This is once, this is twice. Then in 2 experiments, the signal, overall signal will be called as summation of signals. So although the technique is called as signal averaging, but essentially it is addition of the signals. So 1 plus 2, right? And because these 2 signals are identical, so I can always write it as SNMR 1, because 1 is essentially equal to 2 is equal to SNMR 1 plus 2. So that means addition of signal over 2 experiments is equal to twice the signal of which is obtained in first experiment, right? So the same thing which I've drawn here. So if this intensity is 1, this intensity is 1, this intensity is 1, or the integration that is area under the peak is 1, area under the peak is 1, area under the peak is 1. So you will get 3 times the area of those 3 peaks. Okay. So the signal is additive in nature and you will get 3 times the area. Okay. Now the same simple relation of addition of signal does not apply in noise, because the noise, if you want to calculate, so let's say if this is my noise over the entire spectrum, and if I want to integrate the signal, the average, that is the average over all of this, if this is my baseline, this will come out to be 0, right? Because of simple reason that there are as many positive signals as many negative signals are there. So if you take average over the entire spectrum, this will come out to be 0. So what you do is, in such a case, to quantify noise, you use something called as root mean square of noise. So if you take root mean square, that means you somehow make all the negative signals as positive, and then you take average overall to quantify the noise. So what I mean is, mathematically you can write it as sigma of noise in first experiment can be written as noise signal in first experiment, and square of that, and summation over all the spectrum, which is shown by this curly brackets, and then the square root of all this. So that is, this is called as root mean square noise, right? This whole expression. Okay. Now we can say that this root mean square noise in one experiment should be equal to root mean square noise in second experiment. So although the noise is random, but they're approximately, we can say approximately these two root mean square noise in one experiment should be equal to root mean square noise over the second experiment. So now let's see if we calculate the root mean square noise which is summed up as a result of summing of two different experiments. So what I mean is that if you carry out the summation of noise over two experiments, it doesn't go simply by sigma noise 1 plus sigma noise 2. It actually goes like this. So you have S noise 1 square, no, not square here, sorry, plus S noise 2, this is whole square, and then curly brackets, that is average over all spectrum, or the summation over all spectrum, and then the square root. Okay, now if you expand this, what do you get? S noise 1 square plus S noise 2 square plus 2 times, this is a simple A square plus B square, S noise 2, right? So now we also have to realize that the noise is uncorrelated between two experiments because noise is random. So if you want to calculate the correlation coefficient between noise, it should come out to be uncorrelated. So that means there is no correlation between noise in first experiment and noise in second experiment. That uncorrelation actually makes this mathematical term as 0 because of uncorrelated nature of noise. Okay, because this is uncorrelated, the product goes to 0, and what you are left with is S noise 1 square plus S noise 2 square and square root of that. Okay, so now if you see that sigma noise 1 plus 2, this is nothing but sigma noise 1 and this is nothing but sigma noise 2. So what you can do is, and sigma noise 1 is equal to sigma noise 2, so what you can do is you can say, and then there is a square root, so square root 2 times sigma noise 1, right? That is easy to see. So that means if you add the noise does not get summed up as signal does, so it only increases by square root 2 times if you double the if you add the result of two experiments. So this means now if you calculate signal to noise ratio, then what do you have? S, so this is over the over two experiments. Let's say if you repeat it twice, then you will get sigma noise 1 plus 2, right? And this will come out to be 2 times signal NMR in one experiment and root 2 times sigma noise in one experiment, and this can be written as square root 2 times signal NMR in first experiment and sigma noise in first experiment. So that means if you calculate signal to noise after addition of two experimental results of two experiments, it becomes square root 2 times the signal to noise of first. So signal to noise, let's say if this is 1 plus 2, this becomes square root 2 times signal to noise of only first experiment, right? So if you double the number of scans, your signal increases by only 1.4 times, right? This is very clear. Okay, so now you can easily correlate or extrapolate if you do this experiment n times, this will become square root of n times signal to noise of first signal. Experiment done only once, right? So that means if you want to double the signal, you need to increase the number of scans or number of times the experiment to be done by 4 times. So this n is also called as number of transients. That is how many times a particular experiment is done and signal is added, or number of scans. In colloquial language, you also call it as number of scans. Okay, so that's why the signal averaging concept is also important, and we need to understand that how many times you need to record a particular experiment and average over all the experiments, so that a signal increases by what number of times, right? Okay, so third point which also needs to be discussed is something called as continuous wave versus Fourier transform NMR. So we already understand the concept of Fourier transform now. We have discussed in one of the previous lectures. So let us also try to understand the concept of continuous wave, which is not used nowadays, but still I feel that it is important to understand this. So what we understand from previous lectures is that if you have Zeeman splitting alpha beta, then there is energy gap which is proportional to the applied magnetic field, and this also has to be equal. So you need to apply RF, radio frequency, which is of the order of B1. Now the frequency of this RF has to match with the energy difference exactly, so that the transition can happen. Now there are two ways to bring that matching condition. So one is that you apply a constant static magnetic field. So you apply a constant magnetic field, you create different delta E values for different protons, like delta E for proton of hydroxyl will be different for CH2 for CH3, right? And you apply a sweep, so you apply a increasing RF frequency, radio frequency, so that whenever there is a resonance condition between the field and the RF, there would be a signal. So let's say you start from here, so you apply a frequency. Let's say when there is a frequency matching between CH3, you will get a signal. Then when there is a frequency matching between omega CH2 and the applied frequency, there would be a CH2 signal. And then when there is a frequency matching between OH, Larmor precession, and the applied frequency, there would be a OH signal, right? So you can increase the frequency by changing the current in the RF coil gradually, right? But as we understand that the signal to noise ratio of NMR is very, very small in one experiment, and you have to do averaging over different experiments. So this particular technique suffers from a great time loss, because what you have to do is, so you the sweep rate of the frequency has to be very, very slow. So why it has to be very, very slow? Because let's say if you carry out the sweep rate and then the transition happens, so you want the magnetization to go back to z-axis before the second transition can happen. Okay, so otherwise the first if you have leftover signal or leftover transverse magnetization from CH3, it will create interference with the new CH2 magnetization. So let's say what I mean is that if you have MCH3 in transverse plane, you want it to be relaxed completely. So you want MCH3 to go back to Z magnetization. This is relaxation, So you want this signal to completely relax before you shoot another frequency, so that the CH2 can be brought down and detected, right? So so that means unless this is totally relaxed, this CH3 signal is totally relaxed, you cannot start sweeping for CH2 signal. That means this entire process of signal averaging becomes very, very slow. So think of a piano in this example. So let's say there is a piano. Okay, so this is my favorite example, and I've discussed this many times in different lectures. So okay, so you have different keys in piano, right? Now you want to understand what is the frequency of each key. So for this, what you need to do is you need to press this key and hear the sound. Let's say your ear is your detector. So you hear the sound and you understand, okay, what is the note which is provided by this particular key. Okay, now once that particular sound coming from this key is totally gone, so that is the signal is completely relaxed, you cannot press the second key, because otherwise there will be a mixing of the two signals and you won't be able to identify the pure signal which is coming from the second key. So once the first signal sound is completely gone, you press the second C and you hear that second key and you hear that signal, and then you identify the note from second key, and then again you want it to be relaxed completely before you press the third key, and so on and so forth. And here there is no signal averaging required because signal is sufficient enough and you are able to hear. But imagine that if you want to do signal averaging over all this, that means you have to repeat this process multiple times, and each times the relaxation times are added in the experimental time, right? But in case of FTNMR, what is done in FTNMR? What is done? So you press all the keys simultaneously. Okay, so all the keys are pressed simultaneously, then you will get a mix of frequencies, and then you carry out Fourier transformation. So in this case, of course, your ear as a detector would not work, and you would need some sophisticated sound detector. So what you do here is excite or press all the keys, excite all protons at once. In other words, you press all the keys at once, you carry out the Fourier transformation, and then you deconvolute all individual pure frequencies from a mix of cosine waves or sound waves, right? Of course, the sound waves are also written in fashion of summation of cosine and sine. So you can isolate individual frequencies by carrying out the Fourier transformation. So the time loss is saved. So the time loss which is required for each signal to relax is not done here, right? So you press all the signals, all the keys simultaneously, and you excite all of them simultaneously, and you listen to them at once, right? So in the same fashion, what we do in case of Fourier transform NMR, instead of exciting each proton one by one, we excite all the protons simultaneously by applying a band of frequencies. Okay, so this particular band of radio frequencies contains the excitation frequency for OH, for CH2, for CH3 simultaneously. So that means if you have, let's say, if you have, let me draw it with different colors so that it is clear. So let's say this is for CH3, this is for CH2, this is the bulk magnetization for 3 different protons. Okay, now upon excitation, upon giving a RF pulse, what you get is all 3 are relaxed back, all 3 are excited at same time. Okay, now this will relax back at its own frequency. Similarly, this will relax at its own frequency, and OH will relax at its own frequency, right? And then what you do is you carry out FT Fourier transform to get signal corresponding to OH, corresponding to CH3, corresponding to CH2, right? So OH, CH2, CH3. So the wait time or the relaxation time is only once, okay, between different signals. Let's say if you want to do signal averaging here, so without doing Fourier transformation, you send this so you put this in loop, and then you keep on pulsing, and you keep on recording the data, and then you average over all experiments, right? So, but this relaxation time is only once per experiment. In the case of continuous wave NMR, the relaxation time is between each and every peak. So for every peak, after you excite every peak, you need to relax, and then you excite the second peak, right? So the time saving is huge factor in continuous wave versus FT-NMR, which was developed by Professor Richard Ernst. Okay, so I hope this concept of Fourier transform NMR is now very, very clear, that how Fourier transformation NMR is really time saving in when compared with continuous wave. So this was the technique which used to be used in initial days when NMR was being developed, and after I think late 60s, the Fourier transform NMR has been in use. So this is because instead of one particular frequency for excitation, we apply a band of frequencies, or in other words, we apply a pulsed radio frequency. This technique is also called as pulsed NMR, because we use radio frequency pulses for excitation. Okay, so pulsed NMR or FT-NMR is basically the same thing in different words, right? Okay, I think that is all for today. So thank you, everyone.